Okay, so beginning section 3. Section 3 is colonial resistance grows. Many colonists organized to oppose British policies, and the tensions between Britain and the colonists lead to armed conflict. And armed conflict just simply means that they are going to begin fighting with weapons. Shots in Boston, the Boston Massacre. Let's actually go to our textbook here and read about the Boston Massacre as it says in your book. Protests against British taxes soon were more open in the other 12 colonies. The slogan, "No taxation without representation," became a pre-Revolution War cry. Make sure you're following along in your book. Because the Townshend Acts had placed a tax on coloring for paints, the people stopped painting their homes. Because of the tax on tea, they quit drinking tea and turned to coffee. And by 1770, the British Parliament had repealed the Townshend Acts, except for the tax on tea. On a cold day in March 1770, some people in Boston threw snowballs at British soldiers and called them names. The soldiers fired into the crowd, killing 5 civilians, including a freed slave named Crispus Attucks. Unfortunately for the British, engraver Paul Revere made a copper etching of the event, which was reproduced again and again. As you can see here, it shows a very different picture than what actually happened. But it was this view of a line of British soldiers calmly firing to the midst of innocent Boston citizens that helped ignite the cry for war. So as you see here, you've got a line of British soldiers. There was actually only 5 there that day, so you see many more than that. And these guys are showed without weapons, and they're not really doing anything bad. And it's, I mean, as a matter of fact, you don't even see snow on the ground. So obviously this portrait as done by Paul Revere is inaccurate, but just like the media today, things are blown out of proportion, but this was done deliberately because Paul Revere was honestly, he's one of our founding fathers. I mean, he was the one that ran through Boston right before the American Revolution, saying the British are coming, and he is taught in most schools today. So let's go back. So that's the Boston Massacre. Let's go back and look at the slide over this. As it says here, British soldiers in Boston often harassed by citizens, and they're called the Redcoats. It's important to remember they are the Redcoats. March the 5th, 1770, and this date is in your notes. A crowd and soldiers argue. 50 surround one soldier. Soldiers come to his aid, and they fire into the crowd. 5 colonists were killed. The Sons of Liberty call this event the Boston Massacre, and it's widely publicized because, again, of Paul Revere's etching. British try the soldiers for murder, and they remove the troops from Boston. However, as of 1770, we're now 7 years after the beginning of the royal period, and things are really starting to go downhill. A lot of people argue that this is truly the turning point in the Revolutionary period. Problems within Georgia. The youngest colony still remains dependent on England. Governor James Wright, who again served from 1760 until 1776, is very loyal to England. And the Commons House, which had been established in Georgia, grows anti-British. Wright vetoes the nomination of one speaker who opposes British actions, and the acts outrage many Georgians, but the colony is heavily dependent on England. Wright believes in British laws, and he only believes in changing policy through negotiation. The governor silences House opposition by ending sessions early. So this highly upsets the Georgia colonists because Governor James Wright is basically completely doing away with talks in the legislature. When something comes up that is anti-British, he's just dismissing them for the day. So they're beginning to get really upset about this. So that is eventually going to lead to revolutionary acts, as we'll see later. The Tea Act and Tea Parties. Committees of Correspondence. Parliament repeals the Tax Acts, and this is, again, the Townshend Acts that are going to be repealed, but they keep the tea tax in place to show power. Boston Samuel Adams encourages peaceful boycotts, not violence, and he suggests a committee of correspondence that spreads the news in the colonies, because he wanted to connect, he wanted to connect the colonies through this committee of correspondence, because again, I mean, you've got, going back to the transportation lecture, I mean, these guys could only travel by horse and buggy or by river. So there really wasn't a way to quickly travel from one place to another, and they couldn't exactly send each other an email. Aiding the British East India Company. The colonists drink smuggled Dutch tea to protest the Townshend Acts, which again, the Townshend Acts, as we'll recall, taxed tea, paper, paint. In 1770, of course, it is repealed. However, the Townshend Acts are very much, I apologize, 1773 Townshend Acts are repealed, but the tea tax is kept in place, which is going to cause a lot of problems. The British East India Tea Company was almost bankrupt because the colonists were beginning to buy their tea from the Dutch. Well, in 1773, the Tea Act gives the British East India Company control of American tea trade. Angry colonists react. Sons of Liberty, again, these guys that are just causing problems, they boycott the tea from Great Britain, and the others block ships in New York and Philadelphia. And the Sons of Liberty organized something known as the Boston Tea Party on December the 16th, 1773. And again, let's go to our textbook and read through that, because there's a great passage in here over that. But make sure you follow along. In 1773, the East India Company had large amounts of tea it could not sell and was on the verge of bankruptcy. Parliament passed the Tea Act of 1773, which allowed the company to ship tea directly to the colonies. It could then sell the tea for less than colonial merchants could. The colonists looked on the law as a trick to get them to buy the tea and pay a lower tax. In December of that year, to protest the law, a group of patriots, including Samuel Adams and Paul Revere, dressed as Mohawk Indians, boarded 3 British ships anchored in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of tea into the Boston Bay. This action is remembered as the Boston Tea Party.
Coach Garner.
Let me call you back, please. The